The call came at 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was our private banker, David. "Mark," he said, his voice tight, "Sarah's here. She's requesting a wire transfer for the full balance of your joint account to an offshore account in the Caymans." I looked out my office window at the Chicago skyline, a cold calm settling over me. For 20 years, I've managed the wealth of the city's elite at Crestview Financial. I'd seen this play out a dozen times with my clients, but never expected it in my own home. "Is she still there?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Yes. She's getting agitated." A slow, hard smile touched my lips. "Good, let her. That account has been frozen for a week." Silence hung on the line. I could almost hear David, the banker, recalibrating his entire afternoon. "Frozen?" he finally stammered. Sarah wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was an opportunist, swept up in a midlife crisis fantasy with a man who promised her the world, a world she expected me to finance. For 6 months, she'd become a stranger. The hushed phone calls, the charity galas that ran until 3 a.m. She thought I was the same, predictable, work-obsessed husband, too buried in portfolios to notice. She was wrong. The final piece wasn't a hunch. It was a manila envelope I received last Monday. Inside, glossy photos from a private investigator. Sarah and Leo, her ridiculously tanned tennis coach, boarding a private jet. Destination? Miami. The charge for that jet appeared on a secret credit card statement I'd been monitoring for months. That was the moment I made my own call to David. It wasn't an emotional plea, but a calm, calculated directive. Freeze everything. Every joint asset. Every line of credit. She wasn't just leaving me. She was executing a hostile takeover of our life. And she just discovered the company was worthless. 20 years. You build a life like you build a portfolio. Careful acquisitions, long-term investments, a shared future you hedge against risk. Sarah and I built our empire from a one-bedroom apartment with a leaky faucet to a sprawling home in Lincoln Park. She was my partner, my chief counsel, my entire world. Then 6 months ago, she started talking about finding her essence. It began subtly. New phrases crept into her vocabulary, words like authenticity and personal truth, usually after a session with her new life coach, who turned out to be Leo. The $50 bottles of wine were replaced with $200 bottles of organic, sulfite-free poison she claimed was, quote, better for her energy. The charity galas, once a shared duty, became her solo escape. I'm a numbers guy. I see patterns. The first pattern was financial. A recurring charge from a boutique hotel on the Gold Coast. For a friend's bridal shower, she'd said, not meeting my eye. Then came the charges from a men's clothier on Oak Street. A platinum watch. A surprise for your birthday, she'd explained, 3 months early. The watch never appeared. The emotional withdrawal was colder than any market correction. The woman who used to lean her head on my shoulder while we watched old movies now sat on the far end of the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a tight, secretive smile on her face. One night, I reached for her hand. She flinched, pulling it away as if I'd burned her. I'm just tired, Mark, she'd whispered. That was the moment I knew. Not just suspected, but knew my asset had turned toxic. I didn't confront her. In my world, you don't show your hand until you're ready to play it. You gather intelligence, you assess the damage, you formulate a strategy. I've advised dozens of clients through brutal, high-stakes divorces. The ones who win are the ones who separate emotion from execution. So I did what I do best. I ran the numbers on my own life. I hired the best private investigator in Chicago, a discreet ex-cop named Miller. I didn't want sordid details. I wanted data, timestamps, locations, financial trails. Miller was ruthlessly efficient. The first report landed on my desk a week later. It was a simple summary: 2 nights at the Peninsula Hotel, dinners at Alinea, and receipts for gifts, all billed to a new credit card in her name, linked to a shell LLC I'd never heard of. An LLC, funded by discreet, regular withdrawals from our joint savings. She wasn't just cheating. She was liquidating me. My love, my trust, my future. She was building a parachute with my money while planning to push me out of the plane. And as I looked at the photos of her laughing with Leo, I felt the heartbreak recede, replaced by the cold, clear focus of a man about to protect his investments at all costs. The Miami trip wasn't a vacation. It was a dress rehearsal for her exit. And my call to the bank was the opening bell for the real performance. "She's making a scene, Mark," David said, his voice a strained whisper. "Security is on their way." I imagined it perfectly. Sarah, who prided herself on her composure, her Lincoln Park poise, reduced to a common shrew in the marble lobby of a private bank. The mask was slipping, and beneath it was pure, desperate greed. "Keep security at a distance," I instructed David. "Let her have her moment, then hand her the phone." 5 minutes later, my private line buzzed. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Mark Caldwell." "Mark, what the hell is going on?" Her voice was sharp, brittle with panic. The carefully cultivated accent she'd adopted over the years was gone, replaced by the raw, flat vowels of her upbringing. "They've locked our account. They said you put a hold on it." I swiveled my chair to face the window, the city laid out before me like a risk assessment chart. "That's correct," I said, my tone as placid as if discussing quarterly earnings. "I placed a security freeze on all joint assets last week. Standard procedure when you detect unauthorized, high-risk outflows." "Unauthorized? It's my money too!" she shrieked. A humorless laugh escaped my lips. "Was it our money you used to set up the Shell LLC, Sarah? Or to pay for the private jet to Miami with Leo? Or was it our money that bought him that platinum Daytona he's wearing in the photos on my desk?" The silence that followed was more damning than any confession. I could hear her ragged breathing, the gears in her head grinding, trying to calculate how her perfect plan had just imploded. "How?" she whispered. "You're a wealth manager's wife, Sarah. You, of all people, should know that I audit everything. You weren't having an affair. You were staging a leveraged buyout of my life, using my own capital. It was a poorly executed plan. You got greedy. You got sloppy." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my desk. The final move. "Every card you have in your wallet, including the secret one you thought I didn't know about, has a 0 balance. The line of credit on the house is frozen. The keys to the Mercedes you're driving have already been deactivated remotely. You have exactly $17 in your purse, according to your last ATM withdrawal at the airport. You are, in financial terms, insolvent." "You can't do this," she hissed, a note of pure venom in her voice. "I already have," I replied calmly. "I'm not a husband anymore, Sarah. I'm your creditor. Now, your little boyfriend is waiting for you in a taxi outside. I suggest you go to him. See how far that charm of his gets you when the Bank of Mark is officially closed for business. But first, I have one last instruction for David. He's going to hand you an envelope. It's from my lawyer." I didn't wait for a response. I just hung up. Through the window, the sun glinted off the steel and glass of 100 skyscrapers. An empire I had built. An empire I would defend. The hostile takeover had failed. Now, the liquidation would begin. I placed the receiver back in its cradle with a quiet, definitive click. The silence in my office was absolute. No tremor in my hand, no spike in my heart rate. I felt a profound and unsettling stillness, the kind that follows a market crash when the frantic selling is finally over, and all that's left is to survey the wreckage. I had just detonated 20 years of my life, and my only physical response was to reach for my glass of water and take a slow, measured sip. This wasn't a victory. It was a necessary correction. My private line rang again. It was David. "She's gone," he said, his voice hushed and slightly awestruck. "Mark, I've never seen anything like it. She opened the envelope right there in the lobby. I don't know what was in it, but the color just drained from her face. That would be the TRO, I said. Temporary restraining order. It bars her from all our properties and from contacting me directly. It also includes the first round of discovery from my investigator. The photos. The bank statements for her little LLC, everything. David let out a low whistle. She started screaming, not just angry but primal, accusing you of being a monster. The security guards were about to physically remove her when the man, Leo, finally convinced her to leave. He looked pale, like a man who just realized his lottery ticket was a misprint. I pictured it clearly. Leo, the bronze parasite, seeing his host system shut down in real time. The dream of a Cayman Islands retirement evaporating in the sterile, air-conditioned lobby of a Chicago bank. And the car? I asked. Just as you said. They got to the valet, and the key fob was dead. The valet told them the vehicle had been remotely disabled. She threw the keys at him. They got into a taxi. She was still screaming when it pulled away. Thank you, David, I said, my voice unchanged. Transfer the usual discretionary bonus to your account for the inconvenience. And please, have the Mercedes towed to the dealership. I'll be trading it in. I ended the call and pulled a different folder from my locked drawer, this one thicker, with the name, Alan Price, Esquire, on the tab. Alan was the shark you called when you wanted to leave your opponent with nothing but the clothes on their back and a mountain of legal fees. I dialed his direct number. He answered on the first ring. Alan, it's Mark, I said, my eyes fixed on the Chicago skyline. The asset has been frozen and isolated. Initiate Phase 2. Alan didn't deal in emotions, he dealt in leverage. His voice on the line was as cool and sharp as polished steel. Phase 2 is underway, Mark. I've just filed the official petition for dissolution. It cites adultery and misappropriation of marital assets. It's public record as of 5 minutes ago. The motion to seize the LLC's records has been fast-tracked. By tomorrow morning, we'll know where every single dollar she siphoned off went. Good, I said. There's one more thing. I'm listening. I'm on my way home. I want the house sanitized by morning. Alan paused for a fraction of a second. You mean you want the locks changed? I mean, I want every trace of her gone, I clarified. Her clothes, her shoes, her ridiculous collection of healing crystals, everything. I'm hiring a team to pack it. I need to know where I can legally send it. Leo's address is on file from Miller's report, Alan said, a hint of grim satisfaction in his tone. A one-bedroom walk-up in Wrigleyville. It's perfectly legal to deliver her personal effects to her new primary residence. I'll have a courier meet your team there to get a signature. We'll document the delivery meticulously. Do it, I said, and ended the call. The drive from my downtown office to our Lincoln Park brownstone usually took 20 minutes. That evening, it felt like a journey across a foreign country. The city I loved, the streets I knew, seemed different. Recontextualized. The opulent storefronts on Michigan Avenue weren't just shops. They were a record of my own foolish generosity. The elegant restaurants we'd frequented were no longer places of happy memories. They were crime scenes, locations where my trust had been quietly murdered over expensive dinners I paid for. When I arrived, 2 unmarked white vans were already parked at the curb. A woman in a dark blue polo shirt with Precision Estate Services embroidered over the pocket met me at the door. Her name was Maria. She had a clipboard and the no-nonsense demeanor of a field surgeon. Mr. Caldwell, she said, shaking my hand firmly. We're ready to begin. We just need you to designate the areas. I walked into the foyer, the scent of Sarah's expensive French perfume still hanging faintly in the air. It was a ghost I was about to exorcise. Everything in the master suite that is hers. I started, my voice echoing in the grand, silent space. The walk-in closet, her vanity, her bathroom, the guest room she converted into a meditation space, the art she bought for the living room. All of it. Maria made a few brisk notes. And where are the items being sent? I gave her the address in Wrigleyville. She didn't so much as raise an eyebrow. To her, it was just another line on a work order. An address. A destination for somebody else's life. For the next 4 hours, I sat in my study, the one room that had always been exclusively mine, and listened to the sounds of my marriage being systematically dismantled. The rustle of garment bags, the careful clink of glass bottles being packed into boxes, the low, professional murmurs of Maria's team as they worked, they were a symphony of erasure. Around 10 p.m., Maria knocked softly on my study door. "Mr. Caldwell? We're almost done, but you should see this." She led me to the master bedroom. It was sterile, half empty. My side of the bed was still made, hers was stripped bare. The closet, once overflowing with designer labels, was now a cavern of empty hangers. She pointed to the back of the closet, behind a false panel I'd never known existed. Inside was a small safe. "My locksmith opened it," she said. "Standard service." Inside the safe were 3 things. A fake passport with Sarah's picture and the name, Jessica Slate. A collection of diamond and sapphire jewelry, pieces I had bought her for anniversaries and birthdays, items she had reported stolen during a supposed break-in last year. And finally, a stack of bearer bonds, untraceable and liquid, totaling over $200,000. I stared at it. The go bag, the emergency parachute for her golden parachute, the break-in she'd faked, the tears she'd cried over her, stolen, family heirlooms. It was all a lie, a calculated move to liquefy our assets and hide them for her great escape. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was grand larceny dressed up as self-discovery. I looked at Maria. "Photograph everything. Send copies to my lawyer. Pack the rest of it with her things." A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "Sir, the jewelry and the bonds, they're worth a significant amount. Are you sure?" A cold, hard smile found my lips. It was the same smile I'd worn when I spoke to David at the bank. "Positive," I said. "I want her to receive it all. I want her and Leo to have that one glorious moment where they open those boxes and think they've won. Let them hold it, feel the weight of it in their hands. Alan will be filing a motion to have it all returned as stolen property in the morning, along with a felony complaint. I just want them to have to give it back." Maria's professional mask finally cracked into a brief, appreciative grin. She nodded once. "Understood, Mr. Caldwell." By midnight they were gone. The house was silent. I walked through the rooms, now clinical and impersonal. The air no longer held her scent. The walls, stripped of her art, looked stark and clean. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a fortress. My fortress. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a single, grainy photo. Sarah, her face a mask of fury and disbelief, standing on a littered sidewalk in front of a dingy apartment building. Piled around her, like a mountain of fallen ambition, were dozens of expensive moving boxes. In the background, Leo was staring at the pile, his hands on his head, his tanned face pale with shock under the flickering streetlights. They looked small, pathetic. Below the photo was a simple message, backquote, "You will regret this," backquote. I typed back a single, definitive reply. Backquote, "Doubtful," backquote. Then I blocked the number and poured myself a drink. The liquidation was complete, the market had corrected, and I was finally, completely, in control. The next morning the silence in the house was absolute. It was a clean, sterile quiet, the kind you find in a building that has been completely gutted. I stood in the living room with a mug of black coffee, watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan. The rage from the day before had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about closing a position. My phone rang at precisely 8:01 a.m. It was Alan. "Morning, Mark," he said, his voice crisp. "The day has begun. The felony complaint was filed an hour ago." The DA is already reviewing it. Given the evidence, the faked police report for the stolen jewelry, the bearer bonds, they're taking it very seriously. A detective will likely be in touch with you today. And the LLC? I asked, taking a sip of coffee. A thing of beauty, Alan replied, and I could almost hear him smiling. We got the emergency order. The bank records are a roadmap to grand larceny. She funneled nearly $500,000 from your joint savings into the shell company. From there, she made 3 transfers to a personal account under the name Leo Martinez. The memo line on each one reads, "Consulting fee." He's not just her lover, Mark. He's a co-conspirator. I want every cent back, I said. We'll get it, Alan assured me. And then some. This is no longer a divorce, it's a recovery operation. He was right. I wasn't a scorned husband. I was an asset manager recovering stolen capital. The distinction was everything. An hour later, an unknown number called my cell. I answered on the second ring. Mark? Buddy? It's Leo. His voice was thin, stripped of its poolside confidence. The smooth charm was gone, replaced by a frantic, wheedling tone. Listen, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding here. I walked over to the window, watching a boat cut a clean white line across the blue water. The only misunderstanding, Leo, is your assumption that I'm your buddy. What do you want? He stammered, trying to regain his footing. Sarah, she's a mess. We saw the news reports online. A felony complaint? Mark, this has gone too far. We can work this out man to man. A low, humorless sound escaped my throat. There is no we, Leo. There is you, an accessory to felony theft. And there is me, the man whose money you stole. The $500,000 Sarah transferred to you? That's marital property, my property. In legal terms, we call the process of getting it back a clawback. And it will be vigorous. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting the reality of his position sink in. The police will be asking you where you got the money for your new sports car. They'll be asking you why a tennis coach was receiving consulting fees from a shell company funded by stolen assets. You're not her boyfriend, Leo. You're her bagman. The panic in his voice was now palpable. She told me the money was hers, from a family trust. She said you were controlling, that you were keeping her trapped. She played me, Mark, I swear to God, I'm just a tennis coach, I can't go to jail. This was it, the first crack in their alliance. The rat trying to jump from a sinking ship. I've got the money. He blurted out, his words tumbling over each other. Most of it, anyway. I can give it back. All of it. I'll sign an affidavit. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything she planned. Just call off your lawyers, please. The parasite was offering to devour its host to save itself. Natural justice. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity. Just the cold recognition of a strategic advantage. I'm not making any deals, Leo. But your cooperation would be a mitigating factor. Have your attorney contact Alan Price. Give him a full proffer, everything you know. Every text, every email, every conversation. If it's useful, we'll see. I hung up before he could respond. He was a pawn, and his utility was now to apply pressure from the inside. The house was still. The city was quiet. I had isolated the threat, cut off its funding and turned its own allies against it. The plan was working with clinical precision. Then, my phone rang one more time. The caller ID was Frank Riley, Sarah's father. A retired plumber from Garfield Ridge. A man of simple means and solid, old-world principles whom I had always liked. I hesitated for a second, then answered. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, thick with a shame that felt ancient. Mark, it's Frank. He paused, and I heard him take a ragged breath. I just saw her name on the local news website. Tell me it's not true." I looked out at the vast, indifferent lake. "It's all true, Frank." Another long, heavy silence. When he spoke again, his voice was broken. "We didn't raise her like this, Mark. Not for this." His voice cracked on the last word, the sound of a foundation giving way. "I know," I said softly. It was the only thing to say. "We have some money saved," Frank continued, his voice thick with a plumber's pride and a father's shame. "The retirement fund, it's not much, but what she took, we'll make it right. I'll sign whatever you need." He was offering me his life savings to cover a fraction of his daughter's theft. He was offering me his honor. "That won't be necessary, Frank," I said, my voice steady. "This is between Sarah and me. You're a good man. Don't let her poison that." There was a long, ragged sigh on the other end of the line. It was the sound of a final, painful acceptance. "You were always a good husband to her, better than she deserved." He didn't say goodbye. He just hung up. I lowered the phone, the silence in the house pressing in, the legal filings, the frozen accounts, Leo's panicked confession. They were all tactical victories. But Frank's words, that was the moral judgment. The final impartial audit of our marriage, delivered by the one man whose verdict I never sought but had somehow earned. It wasn't a feeling of triumph, it was a feeling of closure, as clean and absolute as a finalized trade. I walked into my study, the one room that remained untouched, and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Beneath a stack of old portfolio reports was a single framed photograph. It was from our 10th anniversary, taken in Italy. We were on a balcony overlooking Lake Como, younger, happier. Sarah was laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes full of a light I once thought was reserved only for me. I looked at the smiling woman in the picture, a stranger from a defunct company I had once invested everything in. I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt nothing at all. It was a closed account, a historical data point. Slowly, I turned the frame over and placed it face down in the drawer, burying it under 20 years of work. The liquidation was truly, finally complete. If you had a strong gut feeling your partner was about to empty the joint account, would you confront them first? Or would you secretly freeze the account like this guy did?